re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute.
Woof woof. Welcome to the Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on the Independent Review.
Welcome to the Independent Review. Today's show includes clips from Ryan Cristian, Derrick Broze, Charlie Robinson, Mel K, The Jimmy Dore Show, and Johnny Vedmore. Let's jump to our first clip with Ryan Cristian and Vanessa Beeley on Syria.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is Vanessa Beeley to discuss what appears to be sort of the revitalization of the Syrian revolution kind of discussion, even though we've been told repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly from Trump and other people, that the war was over, now it's back on, and now it's over again, or any number of narratives around Syria, when all of the evidence, as far back as you can look, has been pretty damn clear that this has been a regime change effort. And even today, that's on the surface. But now with a lot of other things, in my opinion being that it's trying to cover up some other things that are hard to cover up today, that we're seeing this kind of revitalization of the Syrian destabilization discussion, as it's the people fighting for freedom and that they're revolting against the bad guy Assad. And it's interesting how in almost all of these narratives today, COVID included, they're just kind of reverting right back to 10 years ago. Like we don't even realize. So I'm happy to have Vanessa back on today to break this all down for us. How are you today, Vanessa? It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's good to be back on. And it's a very critical time, actually, in the war for Syria. It's a major escalation on a number of fronts, actually.
And that's one point that I think, as much as I open with kind of like the facetious kind of perspective, is that as no matter what, there are always people that are under the boot being, suffering by, on pretty much under most governments, all governments, as far as I'm concerned. But we can see that because of the U.S. agenda, that these people are continuing to suffer, as with so many other occupations. So what are you seeing in Syria that is, kind of indicative of this kind of revitalization of this movement, this agenda, as you see it?
Well, I mean, the lead up, of course, we have to remember also that, America isn't doing too well in Ukraine. NATO isn't doing terribly well in Ukraine. There are, I think, 14 months until the US elections, as much as we know that, they're a complete theatrical event. Still, they have some meaning for people in Syria if there is some change in direction. Obviously, Biden ramped up the aggression very much so against Syria. He's been building up military presence in the northeast. He's been basically reactivating ISIS proxies, because, of course, people should know that ISIS is just another terrorist proxy of the United States. Cabal, the whole cabal that is trying to destabilize and balkanize Syria. So ISIS,
real quick, for those that might push back on that in general, I just want to say, because that's such an important point that people, if they haven't heard that before, might be kind of taken back. Like, we'll just casually put that out. But I'm going to include the Ben Swann documentary, as well as James Corbett's 3-part documentary on this, that it's just, there's no questioning what's going on here. This is a U.S. proxy force in a general sense. I'm sure there's peripheral parts of this that maybe aren't under complete control, but that's the reality. So go ahead. I just want to make sure people know that that's not disputed by me, and that's what the facts show. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, also, if people want to check out John Kerry's conversations in a closed session in the UN in September 2016, which were picked up actually, first of all, by the New York Times, surprisingly, and published in full, where he basically said that Obama administration considered ISIS to be leverage against the Syrian government, and that basically they were happy to allow ISIS to flourish if it put pressure on the Syrian government at that time. Of course, back then, the US was still thinking, oh, this will all be over, in a couple of months. They're never going to withstand, as it is now, almost 13 years of this aggression and some unprecedented savage sanctions against the people, unilateral sanctions against the people. They're never against the named individuals or entities that the West claims that they are, imposing the regimes against. They always target the people to ensure the lack of dignity, the lack of resources, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of food, the lack of fuel, energy, etc., for the people of the various countries that they're targeting. Yes, so effectively the ISIS is another US proxy. Since the earthquake on February the 6th this year, we've seen really a ramping up of operations carried out by ISIS against civilians, against Syrian Arab Army. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, there was an ISIS attack in Dore, which is to the east of the Euphrates, northeast. So in the territory, kind of the no man's land between Syrian Arab Army and Russia and the US occupation via the Kurdish separatists, the Kurdish Contras that are also looking to create an autonomous region in the northeast, supported, of course, by none other than Victoria Nuland, who's been making a lot of noise about how amazing this would be to carve off the northeast corner of Syria and turn it into the so-called autonomous region. So all of this has been going on. We know that the US forces are being brought in to effectively escalate confrontation between Russia and Syria, and of course Iran and Hezbollah. Israel has been very busy targeting military infrastructure, particularly air defense, trying to destroy Syria's air defense capability, but also trying to kind of target what they consider to be offensive weapon development in Syria. Unfortunately for Israel, the majority of this development is being done far underground. The Syrians and the Iranians are not stupid. This development and this weapon development, defense and offense, is done in underground development areas. And so targeting by long-range missiles for Israel is not effective. So there was a recent report actually put out by a university in Tel Aviv, and I've written about it at my Substack. People can go and have a look. Talking about the threat from Syria, the strategic threat from Syria. So all of this kind of ties in because the messages being put out by Israel, the messaging being put out by the United States, which is becoming more and more belligerent towards Syria as the campaign in Ukraine fails, basically, despite everything that they're throwing at it. NATO is looking, kind of ridiculous in Ukraine. However you perceive the conflict, Biden administration is losing and is basically being made to look like an idiot, although that's not terribly difficult because he doesn't do himself any favors. So basically what we have, I think, is an attempt by the Biden administration to get what they think will be a quick victory in Syria. And so alongside the attempts by the US in the northeast to particularly secure the only safe crossing for Syria, Iran, and Iraq at Al-Bukamal, which is in the northeast on the border with Iraq. Israel regularly bombs humanitarian supplies that come in. It is, of course, also a channel for weapons and so on to come into Syria, completely legal. Syria is at war and its allies are helping. And the Al-Bukamal crossing is one of the few remaining crossings that is open for Syria for any kind of relief to enter, particularly after the earthquake. But again, Israel bombed the area as humanitarian relief was coming in from Iraq and Iran. So the US wants to secure this border crossing because that will effectively close the entire eastern border with Jordan and Iraq with the US in control. But at the same time, what have they done? They've triggered, we'll talk more about the details, but they've triggered another 2011 peaceful protest revolution in the south amongst the Sweda community, the Druze community. Now, if people don't know, Syria is made up of multiple sects and faiths and religions, and one of the beauties of Syria is that it coexisted, Christian with Yazidi, with Ismaili, with Kurds, with but of course, what does the West always do? It, as it did in former Yugoslavia, it creates these sectarian statelets that are weak, and conflict can be maintained both within them and against neighboring states. Right.
And historically, predominantly focusing on the Christian populations in these areas. As I understand it, Syria before the invasion was I think, had the third largest Christian population in the Middle East. These are just things that Americans, or in general the West, don't consider or don't understand. They just perceive it as a terrorist country because that's how the U.S. frames it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point. And also another important point is that the West wants to get the Christians out of the Middle East. Why? Because then that leaves a vacuum where it's easier for them to stir up sectarian conflict between Muslim Shia, Muslim Sunni, Muslim Alawite, etc., without the Christians being there as a kind of almost a buffer in a way, right? But the Druze sect, just for people to understand, they you will find them in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Israel. They are effectively, they're quite an interesting historic sect. They draw from a number of religions, including Islam, including Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. It's a really sort of interesting mix. It's a very conservative community. And basically there is a minority within that community. The majority are for the territorial integrity of Syria and for the protection of the Syrian state. One of the greatest generals that fought the war against terrorism in Syria was from Sweden, General Zaradin, who was killed by his car driving over a mine after he'd liberated Dore in the east from ISIS. So he's considered a hero in Syria. But there is a small minority that is effectively controlled from Lebanon and Israel. In Lebanon, the leadership is Walid Jumblat, who's a famous figure that has since 2011 been working against the Syrian government and the Syrian presidency. And it's this minority which has now been triggered. But the important point is it's not only triggering this minority, it's what the West always does. So what has America done in preparation? It's moved 7,500 Free Syrian Army, so Muslim Brotherhood factions, from the north, from Turkish-occupied territory, to the US illegal military base at Al-Tanef, which is in the southeast area on the border with Jordan and Iraq. So it's moved 7,500 terrorist militants down to this camp to train them and equip them. The plan, according to documentation that was released here in Syria showing the plans of the West to a large degree, is that those 7,500 militants will be deployed to the border with Syria and Jordan, where they will maintain and control the crossing points. This is, of course, exactly what they did with Al-Qaeda in the northwest. The crossing points there that allegedly bring in humanitarian aid are controlled entirely by Al-Qaeda or by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as it's now known, HTS, led by Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who, of course, was first with ISIS, then Al-Qaeda, and then he splintered that off into HTS. And yes, you've just put Rukban Camp up on the screen. From Al-Tanef, Rukban Camp is immediately to the south, and Rukban Camp is now known as, I think this was Eva's article, right?
Oh, this one, yes. No, this one I believe was Whitney's. Yeah, Whitney Webb's.
Oh, okay, fine.
But Eva's covered it a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, she's not been to the camp, but she's interviewed refugees that managed to leave and come back into, I think it was Homs. So basically, Rukban is another recruitment center for the US to bring in militants and terrorists. So if you look to the south, slightly to the west, you'll see Sweda. And then to the east, again, Dore. Now, Dore, of course, was the start of the so-called revolution in 2011. It is still a very conflicted area. It's very controlled by armed groups, mafia, that basically, when the area itself was kind of recaptured, first of all, really by Russia. Russia had control until from 2018 until 2021, really. And then Damascus in 2021 sent their own military to basically take control back from Russia. But really, it's not, I won't say it's not been well handled, but the armed groups splintered into so many kind of mafia factions, including those that are doing the majority of the drug smuggling now, that it's very difficult to control. And of course, a lot of the attention of the Syrian army and military is to the north, right? So the south has to, it's a huge country when you think of a military campaign. It's very difficult to keep control of every single sector.
That's really quickly, if I could make a point for that in general,
Yeah.
in the general sense, I think what people, that's a really interesting point for people to understand how just because a group may be funding, arming, supporting a faction or not, the point is that things can change and evolve and there'll be factions that break off. But the point is that that group is still responsible for the creation, arming, and funding of that group, whether or not they're still dictating their choices today. You know, that's one of the games that kind of get played, even going back to examples of Saudi Arabia sort of admitting that from their Wahhabist kind of mindset, like the groups they created were all kind of originated from this kind of creative point, but then they don't necessarily have control of all of them today, but it's still ultimately their responsibility. So I think that's an important point to understand, because as you're saying, they just dump money and arms on anybody they might think will destabilize the area, and then kind of stand back and act like we didn't do anything about that. And I just think that's important to understand. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I always say this, I when you take out the religious aspect, all of them, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Sham, Jabhat al-Nusra, all of these groups form their own mafia in a way. So I tend to see it, even though they are all kind of receiving funding from various different streams that are involved in this destabilization project, they have their own agendas and interests in relation to power, to status, to territory, to control, to money, very important. You know, these guys are mercenaries, basically. They're not fighting for any real ideological aim or agenda.
That's a really important point as well for people. Like, as much as that's how it gets framed from the West, as you've covered a lot, like a lot of these groups are outwardly, like I think even also was admitted by the Saudi government as well to some degree, that most of these kind of leadership factions of these larger groups aren't actually religious at all. It's more of a tool that's used to, that's a statement. I can't verify that, but that makes a lot of sense to me, that it's just another tool being used and people fall into that.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most purest, funnily enough, is ISIS, that really does have this vision of a caliphate and so on and so forth. But the other groups I would definitely perceive more as mercenaries. I mean, particularly the foreign groups like the Uzbekistanis, the Turkmens, the Chechens, the Uyghurs, and so on. I mean, okay, some of them do have an idea of creating some kind of caliphate inside Syria. But above and beyond that is their ability to earn money out of this, basically. Right.
They often see themselves taking advantage of what the West is doing. It's kind of like they're both see themselves as taking advantage of each other. Because, I mean, you know, like in a general sense, and it's, as you said, it's not really about any aim or goal. It's really just about taking advantage of the situation. As long as
it's opportunism, basically. And so what we're seeing now is basically opportunism, right? Because with the US power multiplying them, and from a very close distance, so from Tanef, the US already has military personnel there. It has a fairly big arsenal of weapons, including HIMARS, long-range, ground-to-ground missiles, and so on. Israel often carries out attacks from Al Tanef because it perceives it as protected territory, even though it's Syrian territory. Jordan is in on this plan again. Of course, it was in on the plan in 2011. And the idea is basically, with this movement of Druze who are calling, the movement itself are calling for federalism, separatism, etc., autonomy. So they effectively are saying, like the Kurds, we want an autonomous region inside Syria. But of course, what's happening, and this is what the West is kind of hoping for, this will spread to Dore, for example, and it already is. The Dore terrorist groups are already coming back together and supporting the movement in Sweden because they see it as an opportunity for the US to come in and help them to annex this territory, right? So that's a whole swathe of territory in the south. And also you have to bring in Israel, because Israel has been targeting the Sweden factions since, well, for decades, actually. Because along with the Golan territory, it perceives as sort of absolutely optimum for them to have control of the territory, kind of Sweden, Dore, and south. So for Israel also, this is a perfect opportunity. Now the other thing, sorry, go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask: is that because of? Is it like higher ground as well as the water resources? Is that the whole general area right there? I know it's the Golan Heights part of it, but is that more strategic?
Well, I mean, the Golan Heights, many people don't know this. They tend to think about oil resources, but actually the Golan Heights provides Israel with 30% of its water supply. The territory in Sweden is kind of interesting. It's tactically quite good, but from Sweden to Tane, for example, it's very treacherous territory. I've been there when the ISIS attack took place against the eastern Sweden villages and Sweden city in 2018, and a number of women and children were kidnapped, and they were taken into the Badia, into the desert between Sweden and Al-Tanaf. It's volcanic lava desert. It's the most bizarre. It's like a kind of lunar landscape. It's very treacherous. It's very hard to walk on or to travel across. But of course, it's also perfect for hiding terrorists in the caves and the holes in between the lava. They're very difficult to see, and they're very difficult to fight against, right? And in Sweden, there is high territory, and again, a lot of rocky territory with caves and so on. So to a large degree, from a fighting perspective, it's good territory to have hold of, because it's very difficult to attack, basically, as is any high ground, right?
Yeah. But
yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, before we get any further into the details of this, just a quick question for you, because it's really interesting, the kind of how this is all coming back up again. But what do you think again, your opinion based on what you see happening, is this just about is this all about Russia? Or is this about Israel's engagement in regard to the Iranian issue in Syria? Is it all together? Like, because you mentioned Ukraine, I think that's easily, or even the election with Biden, the easy win for Syria. Like, this is multifaceted. You know, what do you see as the primary reasoning of recreating this kind of false revolution?
Well, it's kind of interesting that a lot of the tweets that are being put out also have on their profile Slava Ukraini, etc. So there is a definite connect, and a lot of the rhetoric is not only against the Syrian government, but also against Nazi Russians,
right?
Which is very reminiscent, of course, of the Ukrainian, Russian orcs and so on.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a connect, yes, and this is definitely against Russia. From Israel's perspective, of course, it's against Iran and Hezbollah. And against Iranian presence, and as I said, weapon and defense development in Syria in collaboration with Iran, because it's predominantly Iran. North Korea also plays a part, interestingly.
Interesting.
But more from a point of view of technology. But Iran is really playing a hands-on part in preparing Syria for the potential of heightened escalation with Israel, right?
Which clearly seems to be happening. I think that the Druze part of this we've talked about in the past a couple times, actually. It's interesting, specifically from Lebanon's perspective, that this seems to be, I would predict, based on your work and others, that that's something we're going to see rise up in Lebanon, just like it's happening in Syria.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to Marwa Osman about this the other day because we've been talking about the situation here. And as she pointed out, British intelligence, US intelligence, but to a lesser extent, this is a British project in Lebanon. They've been developing, for example, the Palestinian camps, which are predominantly Muslim Brotherhood in Tripoli in the north, but also in the various other Palestinian camps. And as Marwa pointed out, in one camp alone in Beirut, there's probably 250,000 radicalized militants or potential militants. And that's without looking at Tripoli or some of the southern camps, for example, that we're seeing explosions of conflicts in, I can't remember the name of the camp, but it's at Sidon port in the south, where there have been Islamist factions fighting against Fatah factions inside the camp, and there have been quite a high number of casualties there. So in Lebanon, we are seeing kind of, obviously, not the start, we're seeing an increase in kind of sectarian provocations, for example. So there is potential, yes, for Lebanon to get pulled into this.
That would just suggest to me that this is obviously much bigger than one territorial issue.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The budding of something much larger, hopefully not something as large as we might be able to envision. Like it begins to feel that way though, right? With the multi-front wars, it's all, you're seeing these very clear sides divide, Iran, Russia, China. It's very concerning because as much as I don't like to fearmonger about the bigger worries of nuclear war and things like that, it's hard not to see that kind of creeping in with these kind of alignments.
Well, it is when you look at what the US is doing. I mean, when you have UN officials actually denying US military presence in Syria, as they did a couple of months ago.
That was embarrassing.
But the thing is that Al-Tanf, again, they've not only got this 7,500 terrorists from the north, but they've also brought in 16,000 Druze to be trained up. 3,500 are supposed to be released back into the Sweda area to effectively replace the existing governmental security agencies, police force, etc. So this is clearly like a move to create a shadow state within Sweda itself. We know, or we believe from reports that have been made here in Syria, that this is being backed again by Qatar. And it's interesting that Qatar was the one country that didn't come forward to normalize with Syria when Saudi Arabia and UAE, etc., and when President Assad was invited to the Arab League summit a couple of months back. Qatar very much kept in the background. Also, simultaneously, so these meetings took place in Paris between British and French officials and the leadership of one of the movements in Sweda. A certain amount of money, they're saying 200,000, was given to the leadership to start kind of presenting themselves as the savior of the people in this area, because of course everyone is suffering from electricity blackouts, energy deprivation, rising food prices, inflation, et cetera, et cetera. And the government is struggling to deal with it. I mean, this is normal. 12, 13 years of war, continuously, increasing sanctions, even sanctions on countries that might want to come to the assistance of Syria and invest and help them to rise up. They will actually be sanctioned, right?
Which shows you this is a war on the people of Syria, as you've mentioned many times, right? You mentioned before in your report with the UK column that they essentially had stopped Russian aid from coming, arguably because they wanted to be the ones to be the heroes of the moment. But either way, hurting the people they claim to be fighting for. Can you speak on that? I think that's very telling.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the Western ploy again and again. It's to reduce the people to such a level of desperation that the US can then come in either directly or through proxy and provide them everything they didn't have for 5 years, right? And so, of course, you have to be incredibly strong to resist that. If someone's coming to your house and saying, hey, we'll give you running water 24/7, we'll give you electricity 24/7. And of course, with Jordan right on the border, this is a possibility. That's what they've done in the northeast. The Kurds have everything. including the oil that they steal from Syria and the agricultural produce that they steal from Syria. But they have everything. They have cars, they have fuel, they have money, they have, they have a good life. And when you compare that to the misery that people are living under in Syria, it's a huge temptation. And the West know that. Mm-hmm. They know it. That's what they do. That's why they put sanctions on. It's to create this level of desperation so they can either manipulate it or they can turn it against the government again.
And that's always a point worth making sure people understand, is that the sanctions are aimed at the civilian population so that they're so desperate that they just don't care, like you just demonstrated. Even most of these people are aware of what's being done to them, but will still take the help because their children are starving, right? I mean, it's very simple how that works out, and it's disgusting. Yeah, it's really horrible. And this image that you're putting up now was in Sweden a couple of days ago, and you can actually see the armed militants there at the protest. So we are literally going back to 2011. The interesting thing, and I have to keep repeating this, because actually Mike on UK Column asked an interesting question. He said, but how can people fall for this again? And I said, but you have to understand the West's MO. So they will take a minority that are already marginalized or are already in opposition to the government that they are trying to destroy. Right. They take an organic base that they really, right. Yes. And then they will power multiply it with their own terrorist forces, right? So now you have this incredible, horrible situation where the people of Sweden, this minority, are actually allying themselves with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, with Muslim Brotherhood, with the very people that murdered their own people back in 2018. This is how sick this entire situation is, right? But of course, this is the West's psychology or psychopathy, actually. I tend to call it all the time these days. And so then the plan is basically of these, so they have 16,000 Druze that they're training in weapons. There is also the potential, of course, that they will release snipers to target civilians and then blame on Syrian security, because the military isn't really in this area. The Syrian Arab Army has deliberately kind of left it to them to manage so as not to increase the conflict in these areas. That's always been the deal with Sweden in particular. Sweden actually has kind of been given special treatment. That's why it's actually so galling for many Syrians who've really gone through the war and really suffered the war. Sweden, to a large degree, was given preferential treatment because of the risk of this kind of movement. So, for example, their sons were not forced into conscription, as any other country at war would do, right? But they were given kind of alleviation from this to a large degree. They actually have better electricity and water supply than many other areas in Syria. So actually, this is kind of what sticks in the throat of many Syrians in Damascus and in central Syria, who have really endured the hardship. And now they're saying, well, how can you be rising up when actually you've had a better life than any of us to a large degree? Right. Right. Well, so, I mean, this speaks to again, that there seems to almost always be some level of group that, like in Iran or any number of places, Venezuela, Bolivia, you can always find some organic pushback that always exists in the country, and that they take advantage of that. And I mean, I hope people didn't miss that point there. You're saying that it is a minority that is being fleshed out with fake real people, but the fake protest to make it look like the majority, which then gets pointed at by corporate media, and they say the revolution of the people, and they back that in general, right? And that's a very important thing, and that's easy to do, right? So I do agree. His point is interesting, because even the minority of people that are still protesting, do you think they're, again, your opinion, but do you think they're unaware that they're being supported by these radicals, or do you think they just don't care because they just are so motivated and they're happy to have support? How do you see that?
I think they don't care. I think, like any of these factions, like the Kurds that are working with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, I don't think they care as long as it's achieving their goals. And this minority, their goal is separatism. Their goal is autonomy. And their goal is toppling President Assad, or at least having their own president.
And that's
right?
something that the U.S. government or the West will support no matter what this group is about. And we've seen
Yeah.
that all around the world. And there's examples we might even
Yeah.
get into today that I think are historic. Well, I mean, that's on that note. And let's give me some of your examples after this about what we're seeing and why you think this is building, and like we saw with the images. But I want to bring up the some of the points that I was just talking about in a previous show that I thought were really interesting. So this is from August 18th. From aswat.com. I wasn't very familiar with the platform, but basically just saying that they're seeing military movements in Iraq, but that as they see it, it's more about action. In particular, it simply says the Americans will try to cut off the Iranian supply route towards Syria and Lebanon. And actually, it's right here. Where was it? Right here, saying the leader noted that the armed factions believe the strategic objective of these moves, one is for an operation outside of Iraq, but to literally, quote, change the rules of engagement with the Russians in Syria. So it's exactly what you're highlighting. So I found that really interesting. And then we have Moon of Alabama pointing out that the U.S. they're sanctioning the moderate rebels that they literally created, armed, funded, and they wouldn't exist without this. The Hamza division being forefront of that. And it's interesting that that's even happening at the same time with the U.S. military training and working with the PKK, YPG, that Turkey sees as terrorists. So it's all very fascinating to me. So how does that fit in to what's going on here?
Well, basically, the groups that are being sanctioned, this is a message to Erdogan.
That's interesting.
Right, because these groups are basically under Turkish control now in the north. So what this is, it's two things. So it's a message from the US to Erdogan, but it's also a support of Jolani, because Jolani, who heads up HTS, is of course the US preferred opposition in Idlib in the northwest.
And that's Hayat al-Sham. That's the Al Qaeda, ISIS. Just so people know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he has a 10 million bounty on his head, but don't worry about that. From the US. I mean, it's a prescribed terrorist group by the UK, even by Turkey, I think, and by the US. But hey, never mind. But if you remember, it was Martin Smith of PBS that interviewed Jolani and kind of brushed his beard and put him in a suit, but he's still a terrorist. And more recently, in May of this year, France 24 journalists went into Idlib and did an interview with Jolani, again, normalizing a terrorist group to present them as legitimate, sorry, the cats are fighting, as legitimate opposition to the Syrian government. And people should know, like there were many stories, I think we talked about this after the earthquake, when the Syrian government was actually trying to send aid to people in the northwest, and it was Jolani that was preventing it. And he wanted 10,000 per lorry to enter Idlib. But he also used it as a kind of marketing ploy in the sense that he said, we will not normalize the Syrian government. We consider ourselves to be independent and legitimate opposition. And for this reason, they've created the what's it called? God. The national, the Salvation Government, but it's still HTS. It's like the white helmets. They just put on a white helmet and then they become politicians rather than terrorists, So it was two-pronged, basically, these sanctions. It was a message to Erdogan, and it was kind of promoting Jolani. It was helping Jolani, because there are battles that have been going on for some time where Jolani is trying to either bring other mafia terrorist groups under his umbrella, or if they're not playing ball, then he's wiping them out with the help of the US, of course, because Jolani and his henchmen call in the strikes, the assassination strikes, particularly of groups like Haras al-Din, who are in direct opposition to Jolani. So Jolani, gives a call to the CIA. The CIA send out their drones, and Jolani gives them the coordinates, and boom, the leadership is gone. So it's a really, it's such a dirty war, and the thing is, who's at the root of it? The US cartel. And I'm not, not only the US, of course, all of the alliance, including the UK, EU, particularly France, of course, Israel, Qatar, and before, of course, Saudi Arabia, Turkey.
The Turkey part of this is so interesting to me. It's just Turkey's a NATO ally, and Erdogan has always played this really interesting role where he just seems to do whatever he wants, and it's not like no side seems to care. It's very strange, and I think I guess my guess would be, at least in this current context, that again the Western agenda, specifically in my mind, the U.S. is okay with what, whether he's working with groups they don't agree with. And I don't think they morally care what group they're talking about ultimately, as long as he's in Syria, occupying territory, destabilizing, making it harder for Assad and Syria's government to take back their own territory. But I think as this develops, whether it's Turkey in regard to these groups, if they somehow get in line, or Israel with what's going on with the Druze population, that all of this very clearly is building in regard to, if you see it in the context of what's going on with Ukraine and the larger proxy war against Russia.
Here is our next clip with Charlie Robinson on the most dangerous company you've never heard of.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm naming this episode the most dangerous company you've never heard of. But if you live in the UK, there's a pretty good chance you've heard of Serco. Oh, you might have heard of Serco. They don't get a lot of publicity. I mean, they don't get a lot of good publicity. Let's put it that way. If you're doing your job the way you're supposed to do it, you fly under the radar. Well, Serco is kind of known for being kind of bad at their jobs. And when you kind of understand who they are and what they do, and what they're involved in, what you would find is that all those issues that you have with government, incompetency, bloated budgets, people that just don't give a shit about doing the job or doing it well, and all those components of government that are so unlikable, Serco's got all that too. So they're like, when you outsource all of the garbage, and in the case of the United Kingdom, quite literally outsourcing the garbage in the form of garbage collection to a company like Serco, you just get more government. So it's a private company, but it acts like the government because they do a lot of the things that the government doesn't want to do. They outsource them to Serco. And then Serco says, well, we'll take your management style, which is fucking up everything that you touch, and then we'll just incorporate that into our business model, and we'll fuck up everything up as well. We'll just charge you for it, which is what Serco does. So it was founded in 1929 as the United Kingdom's division of RCA, Radio Corporation of America, right? So this has been around. We're coming up on 100 years that Serco has been around, but it's a spinoff of RCA, and RCA has some deep state ties that are, very well known. So whenever you start to talk about some multinational firm that kind of, comes out, it has all these government contracts, I think it's important to dig in the best that you can, find out like who they are. Is it just some guys that just put this team together last week and they're servicing contracts? Or is this a company that's been around for 100 years? I don't know which one's worse, to be honest with you, because you almost don't want a company that's been around for 100 years and has all these devious ties, because then you know that they're up to no good. But then again, what are you going to do with somebody that just went into business last month and decides they're going to handle the contract? So how do you manage that balance between experience and not so much experience that you become part of this permanent state? And Serco has done a really bad job of all of it. They're really good at getting government contracts, though. They're excellent at that. That is their bread and butter. They know how to navigate. I mean, I'm not saying that they're bribing the people in the higher ups of power in the United Kingdom, but you don't really need to. You just do kind of like what Lockheed Martin was doing, which is you just put them on the payroll after they're done working there, right? You just give them a job as a lobbyist or a consultant who plays golf with powerful people, and then they get deals done. That's one way to do all of this. So this company employs 50,000 people, so it's a big one, right? It's based in Hook in Hampshire. I've been to Hampshire. The last time I was in London in 2019. We went to Hampshire and we stayed there for a night, and it's beautiful. And I remember thinking once I discovered that Serco was based there, I thought, well, that's kind of weird, Like you would think that they would, I don't know, they'd be right in the heart of London. And you wouldn't think that they would be in such a beautiful English countryside, to be committing such atrocities as they are. The scenery doesn't match the psychopathy with regard to Serco. So next time you get out to, if you're ever in that area, and you can make a detour to Hampshire, it's beautiful, man. It really is. It's a great place out there. We had a opportunity to stay there, and we took them up on it. So let's just describe this company as a British multinational deep state operator. Sound good? Sound fair? I mean, because that's really kind of what it is. They work off of government services. They take care of government services. The government has all of these tasks that they need to fulfill, obligations, things that come with, when you pay your taxes, you want your government to do certain things, and the government doesn't like to do any of those things. So what they do is they just take your tax money and then outsource it to somebody else who can do all those things, because they're too busy being the government that they can't get bogged down in like picking up trash and stuff like that. So they hire Serco to do that. And then they pay them with tax money that, you pay the government, and then the government takes your tax money and gives it to Serco. Now that'd be fine, I guess, if they were really good at their job. It'd be one thing if they were like, the government has recognized their massive incompetence and they have outsourced it to this private company because the private company is going to do a much better job. Now, if that was the mentality behind this, I'd almost be fine with it. Be like, great, to anything, the fewer things that the government does or touches, the better, right? If the government, in some sort of epiphany, some sort of post-ayahuasca self-exploration trip, decided, we're really bad at all these things. Maybe we should just outsource it to somebody else who likes doing them. We don't even like servicing the people. We hate the people. What if we found a company that we could outsource this to and they could do it? They do a much better job. We'd pay them well, and then we'd just say, you guys do all this, and we could find that company, and they would be, if the government had that sort of epiphany and then went out and found a fantastic company or a variety of multiple companies that were really good at what they did, good. That'd be like the government raising its consciousness level to the point where it had the ability for self-reflection. Thanks for watching that clip. If you want to hear the entire episode in audio format, just go wherever podcasts are served, search for Macroaggressions, subscribe to the show, and please rate it when you get a chance. Thanks, everybody.
Our next clip is from Derrick Broze on who is behind the push for digital driver's licenses.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today we are going to talk about my latest article regarding digital identities, specifically digital driver's licenses, or what are known sometimes as mobile driver's licenses, and even more specifically we're going to focus on North America, the United States specifically, and Mexico. That's a lot of specifically. We're going to talk all about digital identities and what it means for travel, what it means for potential COVID restrictions, for climate change, how it ties into all of that. We'll also be reviewing some of my past work on this topic. So I want to encourage you guys, before we get into it, to bookmark my website, theconsciousresistance.com. The Conscious Resistance on any platform you're on. You can probably find us there, especially alternative media platforms like Odyssey, BitChute, Rockfin, Hive, Blockchain. We're all over the place. You can also find us on Spotify and Facebook, all the usual places. And if you're listening on YouTube, guys, we're barely hanging on. I've had 2 strikes in the last couple weeks. I don't even really pay attention to it anymore. There's so much better places to watch my content than YouTube. And in fact, over the last month, they've taken down 2 videos, which are currently available other places, right? So they've taken them down off YouTube, but they're still available elsewhere. So I don't know why you're following there. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into it. What final thing though is just to remind you guys, if you're new to my content, scroll down here to the middle of our website. You can see everything about my content, from what is the conscious resistance. You can look at my investigations, my documentaries. You can download my books, learn about agorism and the exit and build philosophy. You can listen to my presentations I've been doing for the last decade. You can look at my content via topic, technocracy, COVID, agorism, motivational, walk and talks, 9/11 truth. Stay tuned for more 9/11 stuff coming up. The Finders, Epstein, the occult, anarchism, Utah ritual abuse, 5G, and I'm going to add some more soon. So I've made this easy for you to digest, so please make use of it. All right, let's get into it. This article is, as all my content, coming from The Last American Vagabond. Go to The Last American Vagabond to get informed as well. Ryan is constantly doing amazing work. I'm part of the team. You can go over here to team, see myself, Whitney Webb, lots of other writers here. You can go down here, click on my name. You'll get my latest articles always. So just want to make sure if you want to find my written content, you might want to follow The Last American Vagabond. And here's my latest article, as I said, dealing with digital driver's licenses, mobile driver's licenses in the United States, in Mexico. And, you know, have you guys seen the website Big Sis? And there's probably a couple others, but that's just the one that comes to mind right now. These are websites that allow you to kind of design kind of like mind maps where you can show relationships. Like you could say, here's Bill Gates's foundation and Bill Gates connects to this person, and you create a mind little map. And I did it before when it came to investigating Lena Hidalgo here in Houston in the Harris County area and the Arnold Foundation, and just showing some of those connections. I'm going to be working on another one with all the pieces of the puzzle of individuals who are involved in the digital identity push. So this one's talking about digital driver's licenses specifically. I'm going to name some names here, but let's go to my other article I wrote back in February of this year. Who is the Better Identity Coalition? And this is worth reading as well. These will all be in the show notes. And it shows how the Better Identity Coalition, they're just this think tank out there issuing reports about steps that theoretically the United States government, federal and state lawmakers should follow. So that's how it tends to happen. You have these think tanks and kind of foundations writing policy papers, and wouldn't you know it, the governments tend to follow or at least get pretty close to what they wish. So I started looking into who's the Better Identity Coalition. We can also go back to this one I wrote in May of 2022, so more than a year ago, exposing the digital ID is a human rights scam, because that's the way they're selling it to people, especially in Mexico and Africa. Man, they are getting their hands hard and deep into Africa for all kinds of reasons, but definitely for the reasons of pushing digital identities and biometrics on people. So we're seeing that happen. And of course, the idea that digital ID is a human right, that largely comes from the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that deal with digital identity. And so this is how it's being sold to people. In this article, I get even more into the network of people that are involved in pushing the SDG number 16, which again deals with digital identity, and the idea that digital identity is a human right that we should fight for now, and that, you know, where it's so sad that people are not having their faces scanned and their eyes and their retinas scanned, because we all know that that's the best thing for human rights. And there's another article I wrote while I'm at it. Might as well just pull it up real quick, because as you can see, I talk about digital identity a lot. I feel like I don't want to say the word expert, but I'm well researched on this topic because I've been researching it for years. I wrote about it in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, back in 2019, published in 2020. There's an article I wrote a couple weeks ago, about the recently launched WorldCoin, coming from Homeboy, dealing with AI. It's in here somewhere. All right, I can't find it right now. I write a lot of articles, but talking about how Sam Altman from the WorldCoin, from the AI company, he's also going to sit with the Bilderberg Group. You sitting with CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, all the different connections. So digital identities are in our face. It is being pushed. Obviously, before it was being pushed, here it is being pushed in relation to COVID-19 and vaccine passports, immunity passports. But that was all just a Trojan horse to get people to accept things like digital identities. And digital identities are going to go hand in hand with social credit scores and digital currencies. Here you go. Sam Altman, Artificial Intelligence, the Bilderberg Group, and WorldCoin. He's the CEO of OpenAI. He was speaking in front of Congress or the Senate recently, and also speaking to the Bilderberg Group. And now they've officially launched WorldCoin, where people stare into this so-called orb and they get tokens that are supposed to someday maybe be valuable. So let's talk about digital driver's licenses. A so-called digital or mobile driver's licenses. These are rolling out across the United States. And you can go back to 2005 and look at the Real ID law passing back in 2005 because of 9/11, of course. 9/11, terrorism, got to keep you safe, blah, blah, blah. In order to do this, let's go digital. So back in 2005, they were already talking about a national kind of ID program or card. I don't think, at least I didn't. I don't think many people were thinking that it was going to be a digital ID. We were just thinking like, wow, they're trying to push a national ID card so they can track us everywhere they go. And that was already kind of crazy. And people have pushed against it, which is why it is now 2023. And the Real ID program is not a complete program around the United States. It is a program that has been slowed down numerous times and delayed numerous times by different states. But by and large, more and more states in the United States have accepted the Real ID program. And part of that is upgrading and digitizing IDs and driver's licenses. So you might be hearing more about this if you live in the United States. And even if not, I'm sure there's similar programs where you live, because this is a global program being pushed by the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, and the UN. They're funding programs like Identification for Development, which is known as ID4D. They're pushing digital biometric programs in Mexico. Again, it's about SDGs. This is an international thing. It's not just going to happen in the United States, but the United States is where it's rapidly moving right now. So these MDLs, or mobile driver's licenses, they come in 3 different forms, including proprietary apps, which are owned by local, state, or national governments. Then there are state-approved apps like Smart ID, and then the Apple Wallet itself, which apparently 4 states are currently using to host their digital driver's licenses. This is going to be an app where you would scan the front and back of your physical driver's license, then verify your ID with a selfie, probably, like scanning your face, your eyes at the same time. It's that biometric data. Then once you're identified, the user can begin using their digital ID as they would be using a physical card. Now, apparently, this is something that Twitter is thinking about doing as well. Actually, I didn't write this. This is Ryan Cristian, who's the editor, of course. He edited in this tweet. I hadn't even seen it. X is seemingly working on and adding a government ID verification with Israeli digital ID company AU10TIX to verify by ID. Users will have to upload a selfie and photo of a government ID. Yeah, it does sound very similar. So you can see how they're, and that's the thing, is Elon Musk wants Twitter, now X, to be the everything app, like China's WeChat app, to be seamless, integrated with your license, your ID, your money, everything. So not a good thing. I will be leaving that platform soon enough myself. In May 2021, the American Civil Liberties Union, they discussed the efforts to mandate digital driver's licenses. And in a report titled Identity Crisis, the ACLU warned that these digital driver's license, quote, raises the danger that there will be no balanced assessment of the costs and benefits of such a system, and that we will adopt the systems that do not strike the right balance between the needs for identification, security, and convenience, and Americans' well-founded aversion to government and corporate surveillance and regimentation. The ACLU senior policy analyst Jay Stanley said the switch to digital identities would have big implications for American life. Quote, if not done just right, digital driver's licenses could be disastrous for privacy, increase inequity, and lead to pervasive ID checks within American life, including on the internet. The first version of an electronic ID appeared in Mexico as far back as 2007, which is kind of crazy to think that early they were working on this already in Mexico, with this company called Gemalto. It was called the Smart Card. Gemalto was an international digital security company which focused on smart cards, tokens, and digital wallets. The Smart Card was deployed for use in Monterrey, Nuevo León, which is near the Texas border. In 2016, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, partnered with the Gemalto to pilot the, quote, digital driver's license in Washington, D.C., Idaho, Colorado, Maryland, and Wyoming. Colorado would go on to become the first U.S. state to deploy a digital license using QR codes stored in a digital wallet. Coloradans who volunteered for the program would install the DigiDL app on their phones and then download the license. Gemalto, the company behind these first attempts at digital driver's license, was actually purchased in April 2019 by the Thales Group. Thales. It's another one of these driving forces behind the expansion of mobile digital driver's license. So have you ever heard of the Thales Group? If not, I hadn't really. I think I've probably seen them coming across just by searching so many companies like this, but I hadn't really zeroed in on them. And I did a little bit of a dive here. This isn't a full deep dive. I'm sure more information will come out as time comes, but my goal here, as I was saying with these other articles, with Who is the Better Identity Coalition, and kind of exposing the different groups, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Bank, and all these folks who are working on UN digital IDs, identification, ID4D program, all this stuff. I want to create a map here. You also got, of course, people like Sam Altman and WorldCoin and their version of that, facial recognition scanning. I'm going to map out all these connections. And so for me, this is just about making an initial realization that the Thales Group fingerprints are all over these digital ID programs. They are a French multinational corporation which is partially owned by the French government, and they are the 8th largest military weapons contractor in the world. Beginning in 2007, Thales, in cooperation with local partner Cosmocolor, implemented the first Mexican smart card driving license in Nuevo Leon. As I said, Thales has expanded their technology to the Mexican states of Mexico, Veracruz, and Sonora. With over 127 million inhabitants and some 55 million drivers, there are many potential benefits for migration to smart card driver's license in Mexico, they state on their website. They're also involved in bringing digital driver's licenses to the U.S. In Arizona, they recently signed a 3-year contract with Thales to develop the licenses and make them available to the public. They made them available to the public this year, March 2023. Thales has developed similar plans with the Florida Department of Highway Safety. They're also saying they're going to make Florida the, quote, first state in the U.S. to provide mobile driver's licenses with leading-edge security mechanisms which are fully compliant with rigorous national and international standards. It seems, though, that there's some evidence that Floridians are not even using the Thales-funded mobile driver's license so far, so that's a positive sign. They're also working on digital driver's license and ID card solutions in 18 different jurisdictions in the North American region, including Alaska, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Maryland, New Brunswick, New Hampshire, New York, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, Texas, Washington, D.C., Wyoming, and Arizona. So this really is a North America thing that they're focused on. Thales Group also recently celebrated the TSA's expansion of digital ID programs. Quote, the TSA is rolling out a new version of its credential authentication technology, CAT scanners, to airports across the country so they can accept digital credentials. Oh, isn't that convenient? And these credentials are apparently, these are readers that allow TSA pre-check travelers to use mobile driver's license, and the TSA can verify it. They're also promoting these things in Australia. They have operations in 56 different countries, so it's likely, very high likelihood that these digital ID programs under Thales Group are going to expand. And I kind of just went a little deeper here on this part, just showing how people have been warning about, including myself, but other organizations have been warning about digital identity. As recently as June 2022, I wrote an article how the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at the New York University School of Law, they put out a 100-page report detailing the growing dangers of reliance on digital identity around the world. The report was titled Paving a Digital Road to Hell, and it talked about the role that the World Bank and this international network that I'm talking about is doing to push these programs. And this is just one kind of section from there. They talk about the World Bank, the ID4D program I've mentioned a couple times. They say that these programs were started with a catalytic investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Omidyar Network, which is Pierre Omidyar. If you don't know who he is, you need to know who he is, as well as various governments. That report stated, quote, we have noted that the World Bank and its ID4D initiative do not stand alone in pursuing the digital ID agenda. They exist within a global network of organizations and individuals. In addition to governments like the UK, US, and France, philanthropic foundations, and banks, the NYU report also points a finger at, quote, private biometrics corporations like IDEMIA, Thales, and Gemalto. So there they are noted right there. And as I note here, there are probably going to be some more articles I'll do in terms of digital identity by specifically looking at what's going on in Africa, because it says here that new networks such as the Global System for Mobile Communications and ID for Africa have played a role in expanding digital ID programs. And so I want to focus more on that and who those organizations are. But Thales is not just pushing digital identity. As I mentioned, they are the 8th largest military-industrial complex contractor in the world, and they have been partnered with other military-industrial complex alum, Raytheon, since 2001, when they combined their radar and communication systems divisions. They created a company, and this is how creative they are, Thales Raytheon Systems. Well, that's nice. and it's 50% owned by each of them. In 2016, they restructured their partnership to focus exclusively on NATO agencies and NATO member states. So Raytheon and Thales are definitely like military-industrial complex companies aligned with the Western military-industrial complex. So that is who Thales is. They now earn their piece of the puzzle in addition to companies like Gemalto, the ID40 Initiative, World Bank, United Nations, World Economic Forum, the Better Identity Coalition, which, as I said, I encourage you to go back and read this article, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Omidyar Network. You also got the ID 2020 project, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and, of course, supported from Microsoft and Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, which itself was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation program. So there's just a whole network of people here trying to push digital identity on us from all kinds of different directions. And they're getting pretty far. I mean, there are more and more places that are becoming cashless and expecting you to have digital means of living your life. Now, of course, a card is something most of us have become accustomed to over the years. So that was one of the first steps to getting you used to not needing cash and to just being digital. But when it comes to using your phone for that next step, some of you are already paying with stuff by your scanning your phone. The next thing will be, oh, just show me your digital identity on your phone through some government app. And of course, if you give the government direct access to your phone, they don't even have to spy on you through other means like the NSA and stuff like that, wiretapping. They can just, you download an app and the terms and service are going to say, hey, we can access everything on your phone and use it against you. And and then they also mandate that you have to use it eventually, and then you're screwed, right? So this is happening. I encourage you to read the section here of the Exposing Digital ID as a Human Right, Colonization 3.0, and the Future of Identity, if you really want to understand like what this is about and where it's going. And yeah, I think that's it, guys. I'm going to put all the links to this new article, Who's Behind the Push for Digital Driver's Licenses in the U.S. and Mexico and Canada. I should just say North America. Who's the Better Identity Coalition, Exposing the Digital Identity as a Human Right. Sam Altman, this whole story, it'll all be included in the show notes, guys. I appreciate you so much. I want to encourage those of you who really do value my work to visit our About page. You can see here support. You can support my work, support the Conscious Resistance Network in multiple ways. You go to theconsciousresistance.com/invest. You can support me on Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to support me on a monthly basis, I got to add here, I'm also on Substack, derrickbroze.substack. You can send checks, cash in the mail if you want to support to our P.O. box, and of course through crypto if you want to as well. I appreciate that, guys, because of all the work I do producing documentaries, releasing books, publishing those, and I've got some new books coming out with different publishers I'm excited to share about you. I mean, I'm paid for some of those things, but the vast majority I'm not paid. I'm paid for writing articles for Ryan at The Last American Vagabond on a monthly basis, but beyond that, all the other content I produce, the Pyramid of Power, it's all coming out of my own pocket and time, and any support you offer is very much appreciated so we can continue to do this important work. I appreciate you. Until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.
Let's jump to this clip from Mel K and her interview with John Klar on taking back farming.
When Monsanto, backed by the Obama administration, secured its right to patent its GMO soybeans, and then if anybody plants its beans in the future, it owns them. That would be like if I sold you a dog, I breed border collies. If I sold you a dog and then I said, oh, by the way, every puppy you ever sell out of that dog, that belongs to me. This is an unprecedented, modern, legal, intangible property right that is intruding between us and our food. Well, they can't do that yet with cows. You may not have heard about the recent English company that's announced that it's splicing porcine DNA, that is pork DNA, with soybeans to create a new plant. Will be a step closer to conversion in a vat, probably from fetal pig tissues. This is how they grow them. And by the way,
here's so sick. That's so sick. I mean, these people, it's the CRISPR technology too. What I learned about that from my science guy is that they're going in and they're changing seeds and embryos and all, and they will never be the same. They will never be as nature intended. They will never be as God intended. And as they continue to breed this stuff, it gets further and further away.
Well, it does. And then the risks become greater. Now we have designer mosquitoes, really clever stuff. But, if you read ancient mythology, it was really clever if your dad could make you wings out of wax and you could fly to the sun. That was really clever till the whole wax thing, the limitation, because we're not omniscient and we play God. Of course, the Bible then ends with the book of Revelation. The third rider of the third horseman is famine. Because if you're totally dependent on a food, if one link goes out of place in that CRISPR technology or in these other freak show things we're talking about. Now, where the law has been shifting is, and the government is coming deeper and deeper into our lives, this proposed Proposition 12 has huge ramifications for America. And as Justice Kavanaugh wrote in his dissent, the United States Constitution was drafted and enacted in part to prevent America from decaying economically because all the states were bickering and undermining one another's commerce, trying to regulate each other. So the idea is we'll have sort of a federalist compact when it comes to commerce. That's why we have the Commerce Clause, but the federal government regulates national or interstate commerce. This, by the way, comes back to the meat processing end too, but we'll skip it for the moment to talk about the rules for pigs. Now, California, what it did was unusual in Proposition 12 is you can't sell pork in that state unless it comes from a bigger pig crate, which the evidence isn't in that this helps, by the way. I've used farrowing pens, not gestation crates, but when I've raised pigs, I've used a farrowing pen or a bumper system, and it's to save lives because the sows are big and they're ornery and they roll on their piglets unintentionally. So you put them in a crate and the piglets can run around and the sow is down, piglets can nurse on them. And so it increases your profits because the piglets aren't going to get crushed and they're worth a certain amount per, right? It also allows you to keep sows separated. If one gets sick, you can give her meds, you can give her injections. They're not easy animals to tangle with. They can be, they have teeth on the top and the bottom, unlike cows and sheep. People don't know this. But sheep will gum you, but also preventing the spread of disease. So it's not even clear that this is scientifically the best for animal welfare, but California has decided that it is. And it now applies to all 50 states, sort of like pre-Constitution, because as the court pointed out, the federal government has not regulated the humane treatment of pigs. And so states are free to do this. Now, if next week Massachusetts passes a law that says you can't sell tuna in this state unless it was caught on a single hook, this precedent now, Ross is the case, just decided recently about a month or so ago, says basically you could have this kind of a patchwork. Smithfield Foods, Chinese majority owned, has now closed its plants in California. Here's the tail wagging the dog, the California progressive tail. 13% of pork purchases they make, they only produce 1% of the pork in the country. So as consumers, they're kind of in a place of making demand. Right. Well, what does that do to America's international competitiveness for pork when other countries continue to use the gestation crates? It's all from a legal perspective. It's wobbling the rule of law and our constitutional federalist structure on its axis. From an animal welfare place, I'm responding here in Vermont to a recent animal welfare push to boycott Vermont dairy products, including our milk and our cheeses, because of what we do to boy cows. If you ever look at the fields in Vermont, you won't see any boy cows. We call them bulls. And this is why, because they eat them. And it's like, well, how do you think people have done this for 10,000 years? What do you want to see? Anyway, I digress. So what you see is a pattern of more and more government and federal regulation and increasingly global efforts to regulate food in the name of safety, but usually making us less safe, but increasing profits for corporations and our dependence on those corporations and their toxic food. Americans are waking up to both the control and the toxicity and the cost.
This is where they're failing, the globalist oligarch elite that I point out on all my shows and have for 3.5 years. They are manipulating things above our government. They skip our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and I believe they've captured most of our politicians that we voted for, both locally and nationally. We got lobbyists and think tanks and NGOs that have more power, I believe, than any individual politician, maybe even including the executive branch at this point. And the globalist oligarchy, the globalist oligarchy that are the members in our nation are very clear. And I believe that they're done with America. I believe that the controlled demolition of America benefits their idea of global governance, which they don't hide on any of their websites. I say to everyone, you think it's conspiracy theory? Go to every one of the UN tentacle groups' websites and put in global governance. And the first thing you're going to see is them debating how the nation state is passé and there should be no nation state anymore. And keep reading, and you're going to get right to Agenda 2030 and the fraudulent sustainable development goals, which are only sustainable for them and for the totalitarian globalist oligarch elites capture of all of our nations. So this is why your work is super important. Another thing that I want to ask you about too, which I've heard about is a problem as well, is this entire push for electric trucks and all this new truck technology that they want to get rid of all of our gas and diesel transportation, that would also very much affect farmers and our food supply and all of that. And apparently it already is. How does the transportation and the push for all electric and ending oil and gas and all of that affect the farming industry and our ability to get food to the people of our nation?
Well, that's a really great question because, again, I think farming is pivotal because it really exposes quickly the fraud of many claims, and not just about cow flatulence, okay? Because that's when we sort of, well, you laugh and we laugh and then we laugh it off, and then they keep coming from the cows. And back to what we're saying, they haven't patented the cow gene, right? And a little aside here, because I wanted to share this with your viewers today, because or listeners as well, not to exclude anybody based on whether they're audio or video.
Right.
My research has shown, and I've written about this previously in some of my writing and articles at various places, and I do recommend my book, by the way, Small Farm
We're
Republic.
going to get there.
And I want to recommend you because, by the way, that little rant you gave was beautiful, and I want to hit on that. But, my research has shown that the synthetic meat was originally touted by a lot of, bioengineering and other companies is this really great thing. And it was pitched to the food industry on the basis of nothing to do with the environment at all. It was the basis that we can increase profit share. If we can get people to eat a soy-based meat product, we're gonna bring down our costs, our input costs by 40 to 45%, right? And that's how they build it. And then huge amounts of venture capitalists understandably jumped on board. Now, when they got into it, they found that it wasn't quite like the dream presented. And by the way, this bears on to your question about electric tractors, which is where I think we're headed. It's not. I don't think there's enough lithium in the universe for electric tractors. But quick answer. And so when they started getting into the development of this product, they found a few problems. One thing was people don't want to eat their synthetic meat. Another thing is it's just really like Frankensteinian and worse than they thought. And you're using fetal bovine tissue, and it became very expensive to produce a pound of meat. Now, if you've now invested billions of dollars into a product that you can patent and own and compel people to eat, like you could soybeans or maybe a vaccine, right? Using the government as both your advertiser and your regulatory coercion of people. Gates has literally said that using regulatory favoritism, basically compelling people to eat this stuff. Well, this is fascism when corporations capture regulatory agencies to advance their products, and they're doing it in telecommunications, they're doing it with vaccines, and so they're doing it with meat. And so that's part of what we see going on. And now if you can cut down the number of cows by killing them, whether in Holland or Ireland or John Kerry suggested in America in the name of cow farts, you're destroying your competition. You own the alternative. The more you drive up beef prices, the more you can charge for your synthetic, now overpriced meat, and eventually completely control it. And this is like, they gave out free cigarettes in World War I to get people addicted. So when they came home, they'd buy them. This is called a loss leader. You give people the idea that your alternative meat is going to be cheaper and healthier and better for the environment. It's none of those, okay? It's not helpful to the environment to create more soy. So something else I just want to say in response, before I get to the tractors, in response to your rant, which I wish you would give again because it was so perfect. For years, people told me about Agenda 2030. No, really, it was very well spoken. I think I told you before, you should be a lawyer, and I don't flatter, but you think well on your feet and you articulate complex ideas well. And that's what you need to do for your client and for a judge. And what has been interesting to me is that for a long time, people say, well, Agenda 2030. And I said, well, it sure looks like a globalist effort. But as a lawyer, if I can't prove it, we're back to the facts and the evidence and the law. Well, we can prove it now.
Yes.
People right on it. They're not 100%. WEF and all the other websites. It's just an endless labyrinth of confessions of a design using lies to dominate us. Yeah. Now let's get to tractors. I want to tie the tractors into the trucks, the tractor trailer trucks, because I think there are parallels. Now we're dealing not with just a little light passenger vehicle. which, by the way, cost 60 grand, not because of the technology of EVs, but because you've got all the backup whistles and lights and dingy bells and the camera that you have to have when you back up now. Because gosh, how did people ever do it? And without a cell phone plugged in with a Bluetooth and 72 little buttons. So when you hit mud, you hit a special button. I mean, this is where our environment's being destroyed, is these gadgets, and nobody wants to lose their gadgets. But I digress. Now, in the case of trucks, tractor trailer trucks, our entire food supply is dependent on them. Our grocery stores would be empty almost overnight. You need to empty all those container ships from abroad. And for the food that comes mostly from California and Arizona, you're trucking it 2,000-3,000 miles or more to big facilities and hubs, and it's all trucks. I just can't believe the amount of truck traffic on our highways today. Most Americans and of your listeners have seen that. They're parked along the side of the road. There just isn't a place to put. We're dependent on them. They, in turn, due to a similarly designed EPA initiative, are required to use diesel exhaust fluid beginning, I believe it was in 2012. All new trucks had to have it. Diesel exhaust fluid we import from China. China had a shortage of it a year or two ago. The trucks won't run without it. Now, a comparable, so this is a vulnerability. We need to start producing more diesel exhaust fluid, which is made from, guess what, urea, which is what we also use to make our synthetic fertilizers, which we could replace with cow manure, but we're worried about their farts. So we're going to create more synthetic fertilizers using urea, which is, by the way, made from natural gas, which is, methane. So now how can you do this with a tractor? Now, what all farmers laugh about is this fantasy of electric tractors is coming from technocrats or people like John Kerry or AOC, who have maybe never even walked past a cow or never walked in a field and know nothing about what it takes to till and harvest the earth. The amount of energy required is astronomical. I know a dairy farm that they get I think they get like 2,000 gallons a week of diesel when they're doing their corn. It takes a tremendous amount of what's called stored energy. My cow's eating grass, that's current energy. It's being produced right this minute with photosynthesis. No need to go to a Chinese factory and burn coal to get the sun's energy. And the more we get away from that, from natural grazing, and the more we get towards these industrial, big ag, huge $400,000 computer run tractors, the more we require fossil fuel to replace the legs of the cows or the sheep that we're walking around, both harvesting and depositing the manure that we now take out of confinement facilities and use more compaction, more energy. The concept of a tractor, the size of battery required, I've talked to farmers about it. It would have to have like a half-mile cable, or it would have to go back to the barn, which sometimes is far away, like every 4 hours. It is simply beyond, and this is a theme that I bet you could summarize in a better rant than mine, is that constantly these Icarians, these sun flyers who are flying to the sun with their wings melting right down to the bone, keep talking about their big plans to do things that they have not got the technology for. They don't even have a science fiction Heinlein novel or an Asimov novel to create a fiction. It's the perpetual motion machine. We're going to make gold out of lead. It sounds great, and to itching ears, it seems to scratch them, but it's false. It's the lies of the adversary, because you can't replace tractors with electric tractors. And probably it will never be, maybe with nuclear. With nuclear, you might be able to do it. But of course, because of the dreamy cultish ideology, we want to exclude nuclear. And I don't mean to go. But renewable products are going to do it. But who will profit from making electric tractors? Who will profit in the universities for getting huge grants to try to figure out some new, megawatt battery that you can, fit in a potato? I mean, who's gonna get paid now to try to figure out how to splice a frog DNA with an acorn? There's somebody out there getting money to do that right now, money that could be used to solve things like, obesity or diabetes, or the things we're causing with the toxic food and high fructose corn syrup and glyphosate and hydrogenated fat that we're feeding our school children. But anyway,
if people would like to know who benefits from it, they should just go to weforum.org and put in stakeholders or partners of the World Economic Forum, and you will find everyone that is doing this.
This next clip is from the Jimmy Dore Show with special guest host Craig Pastor, Kurt Metzger, and Ryan Cristian.
Ryan Cristian's with us today. How you doing, buddy?
Good, brother. It's good to see you again, man. It's been a while.
It's great to see you. Like I said, I miss our conversations on Tuesday, and I'm very excited to have you on today. And I don't know what it is, but sometimes in the political world or the news world, when you just put it out there. I don't know if Joe Biden knew you were coming on today, but then he just gave us a little golden nugget of what's to come. I retweeted this out. Here we go again. But I'm going to play it again. This is Joe Biden. I'm going to play it one time. And this is what he said over in Tahoe over the weekend, talking about COVID possibly coming back when it comes to vaccine and mandates. Take a listen.
President, can you say anything about the uptick of COVID cases and new variant?
Yes, I can. Matter of fact, I signed off this morning on a proposal we have to present to the Congress a request for additional funding for a new vaccine that is necessary, that works. And tentatively, not decided finally yet, tentatively, it is recommended that, it would likely be recommended that everybody get it.
Everybody.
No matter whether they got it before now.
And, just so we know, it's not old Sleepy Joe just going out and mumbling stuff. It was followed up by our press secretary this morning.
The president said in Tahoe that he had tentatively decided to recommend everyone get the new vaccine. When is he going to decide finally?
So I think you've heard from the FDA and CDC. They've made an announcement on the new vaccine. So certainly they said that there'll be an updated vaccine mid-September, I believe. So we know that, as you all know, vaccinations against COVID-19 remains the safest protection for avoiding hospitalization, long-term health outcomes, and death, which is why we are going to be encouraging Americans to stay up to date on their vaccines.
How about new?
I had to throw that one. I had to throw that one. I had to throw that in there. Ryan, you were so nuanced about this coming out of the gate. I got a lot of information from you and Slow News Day and Jason Burmis, where a lot of people were like, "Hey, man, how did you see this coming out of the gate?" And I always talk about TLAV, but now it seems like they're setting us up for again. Here we go. I mean, 6 months till the first primary in South Carolina and Iowa. Your thoughts on Joe Biden saying it looks like this is going to be mandatory whether they got the last vaccine or not?
Yeah, well, there's so many ways to take that. First, since you mentioned the election, the obvious point that people are making, which is, I think, very easy to see, is this lines up yet again for the mail-in ballots that you're always talking about. The very mandates, the lockdowns, where it all goes into, But what he's saying there is so interesting to me because, first of all, it kind of sounds like Biden is incorrectly relaying what she was saying or what we've all heard from the CDC and the FDA, right? Because it's like the way he says it, it sounds like a new thing as of today going forward. And maybe that's what he's saying, by the way, because the point is that they're in development of. I mean, I think somebody just made a point to say 175 different directions this is already going. If you look at the different trials that are underway, all different mRNA injections, it's madness. But what they're talking about is the new formulations to the new variant. But we're already 3 variants past or 4 variants past what they said that one's for, which is XBB.1.5. And so based on Omicron Delta overlap, you can already prove that's not going to work, let alone whether the platform itself is safe, which a very new peer-reviewed study just came out making the argument that it's not the new adjuvants or the new additions, it's the actual platform that's leading to myocarditis. So, there's 1,000 ways you can go with that, but it's just the extension of the same broken program.
So I just have to push back a little bit. I appreciate what you're saying, but of course the vaccine is successful and it is safe and effective, and it will help. It won't stop the spread, but it will slow.
It doesn't stop infection as traditionally
hospital
a vaccine,
beds, guys.
Yeah,
as traditionally a vaccine would do.
No, it's not tradition. It's not. It's breaking tradition. That's why I love about this new platform of mRNA vaccine technology, and of course, sir, there's myocarditis that's caused by it, but it is rare. It is super rare.
What even is a vaccine?
1 in 35, maybe I heard, but it's rare.
I don't even know what it is. I just know I want it in me.
Yeah.
Did you guys know that Ralph Barrett from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, worked in the 90s on a coronavirus-induced myocarditis? I always find that to blow my mind. And then he went on to try to make it a self-spreading vaccine in the caves of China. It's open research from the 90s.
Wow. I know that's the kind of truth that'll get you a strike. So I just got to be careful about that. That vaccine's fantastic. Anyway, go ahead, Craig.
Well, let's just talk about a little bit about Twitter first, because I think that, this time coming out, I try to take the W's where I can get them. And I think the biggest sin for the last time when it came out COVID-19 was the censorship. We didn't allow enough voices in there. They censored doctors. They took them down, Dr. McCullough being one of them. Now they're back, right? But, we've put on the show before. We've talked about Elon's new choice to run Twitter, or X, is coming directly from the World Economic Forum. So these are things that I'm nervous about. And this over here, Twitter has locked me out of my account again when no explanation was given. This is Garland Nixon. I see a lot of this stuff on the horizon coming right now, and it's I'm very fearful because this time out of the gate, if they start up over again, the censorship on Twitter is going to be a big part of what information gets out there or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, I think Twitter has been a kind of a ploy from the moment it kind of shifted under Elon. I mean, we can talk about the Twitter files, quotes and files, because it was all really just screenshots with no source material. As much as I do think a lot of that stuff was true, it was still kind of training people to engage with screenshots as definitive information, And so I think what all this has been doing is kind of lulling us into a position of feeling like things have changed, when from the very, very beginning, arguing freedom of reach, but not freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, that's the same thing. I had a great interview with Sam Husseini, who really highlighted this as a precedent historically. Those are one and the same. Like, you can't divide those. And we should be clear that point comes from the ADL, which he made clear he was working with from the very beginning. He's been censoring hate speech from the very beginning. I mean, none of these things align with the real concept of free speech. So this is completely expected, in my opinion. And Garland is one of those outspoken voices who's not afraid he doesn't pull punches. I get it. I mean, I'm half expecting myself and people like you guys to be censored soon with where this is going.
Yeah, I'm kind of bracing for it myself. With if it comes around again, are they going to do the same thing as they did before, where they censor everything from top to bottom? YouTube has not changed whatsoever. You still got to be careful on YouTube all the time. Twitter, though, seems to have a little bit of an opening, but then again, it seems like it's circling the wagon. Here we come again. I mean, for me, the big tell was the fact that Alex Jones wasn't lapped back on Twitter, and I'm not a big Alex Jones fan, but if you're going to be about freedom of speech, what did he do wrong? It just seems like another oligarch in Elon Musk making decisions in this case. And what has really changed? Nothing. So,
or Ye, for example. Go ahead.
Ye. Oh, yeah. And Ye did a lot to come back. Well, let's talk about this part right now here, too, as well. Effective immediately, masking with approved hospital-provided ear loop mask is required at all times for staff, veterans, and visitors while in the high-risk areas. So they've already done this. We've seen this at other schools. We just talked about this briefly. Here comes the masking back again. What a way to divide the people. Your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, well, which part? I mean, I hope we all can understand, as I think you guys were saying before, that the peer-reviewed science is just unbelievably obvious. It was before this started, and it still was in the midst of all the madness, and it is now. I mean, there's 1,000 peer-reviewed studies you can show that find long before this that these things were not statistically significant in reducing transmission.
Yeah.
That's the way you need to say that. That's exactly the truth. And so now that it's coming back, I mean, it's almost... It feels like more... We're going to talk mass formation, psychosis, or something like that. I just don't understand. These people are either too dumb to know they're wrong or they're dishonest. Because it's very, very apparent to me that these things are not only not effective, but are also, in fact, causing a lot of these problems. I think I heard you mention before, which is absolutely true, backed up by peer-reviewed science, bacterial pneumonia is a gigantic problem with specifically cloth masks. And don't forget, that's the one they almost made everybody wear in the very beginning. And so you have this concept where you're creating illness that then gets framed as COVID-19. You have systemic inflammation that gets caused that ends up, I mean, especially people that now have broken immune systems. You put a mask on them for extended periods of time. I mean, this is only going to exacerbate the problem, So I don't know why these locations are choosing to step into it again, other than control, quite frankly.
Well, I mean, I've talked about this with you before. I mean, there has to be some, I get it. It can be very frustrating and you get very angry at people for not kind of waking up to what has happened. But I think the programming, the way they've scared people, there's got to be a little bit of compassion, for these people who are just duped into thinking that, if they don't wear a mask, that they're at risk and they're going to get sick and die.
These are people that would take to a burqa if it had been inflicted, and they're like, you have to wear burqas, and there's people that are like, I know I want this.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people that want to have masks, and it fulfills them in a way they never even saw coming, and they don't want to take them off now. It's past like any kind of it's so, like people still wearing a mask now, like that's a wubby to them, like a security blanket.
Wubby, yeah.
There's plenty of studies that say that exactly, by the way, that it's more about like makes them feel better. Even Fauci made a point to say that in his earliest video about this.
Oh, you're right. He said that when he said not to wear one.
It makes you feel better, and and stuff
maybe
like that.
it makes him feel better, but it doesn't do
Do you
it.
think that somebody got to them and were like, no, we need people to wear masks because it's the mentality of that something that it's going on. It's like the mass psychosis that you're talking about. The fear. If somebody's wearing that mask, it's just that kind of like radiates.
They had that fear
scare,
anyway.
fear.
I know a bunch of them.
But it's even increased now with the mask walking around.
Dude, young people, when I worked in New York, I worked on a lot of shows in writers' rooms when people were like, hey, we're going to get our flu shot. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, what am I, 70? But at the time, and it was the same argument, but it wasn't nearly how it is now, which is we all knew, I remember when they first came out, like, well, it doesn't necessarily protect against the flu that's going around. So I'm like, well, why would you bother with that? And they go, well, old people or whatever. Then I start working in all these offices and people are just going on their lunch breaks to get them.
Yeah.
It just wasn't mandatory, so I didn't think that much about it. But now, those are the people that are like, yeah, mask.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a new drug for my inner emptiness and sadness that I always feel because I suck?
So
I'll take that.
Do they call the flu vaccine a flu vaccine?
No one called. You called it a flu shot.
But is it now that they've changed the definition of vaccine? Does the flu shot fall under that definition?
Yeah, they started slipping it in to make it. So they go, and other flu vaccines. They were always trying to probably push that in the merchandising, calling it that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't in the dictionary until recently.
There's all sorts of wildly dangerous ones coming out. They've got the RSV flu COVID injection. That's mRNA they're working on. There's also the ferritin nanoparticle universal flu vaccine. These are all in production. They're already being tested.
Yeah.
I mean,
so they're being tested. We don't know if they're safe or dangerous. They haven't been. They haven't been.
I heard they're going 10 mice instead of 8 this time.
I hope they go with 10 mice.
10 rodents instead of 8.
So I heard they're trying extra hard since they made so much money from doing such a great job on this one.
Well, in September, the CDC, the new head of the CDC is supposed to announce the fact that they're going to have a combination shot, right? The flu and the COVID one. And they're going to recommend it once a year. So as it mutates.
Once a year if you'd like to be employed or feed yourself or live inside a house.
Yeah.
They just admitted, though, that the CDC actually just admitted the data does not support annual shots, even though the CDC director just literally said that publicly. I bet you it still happens anyway, though. That's how this seems to have gone, like the FDA and so on.
I bet the data supports it and you're just lying.
That too. It could be. Who knows?
And let's remember, CDC also says it's safe and effective. Here's the other part I want to talk about right now, too, as well, because this is Carrie Mullis. And a lot of people need to go right to this right over here, the PCR. They never had a credible testing mechanism to find it. Even the guy
to find the COVID.
To find the COVID.
Right.
Anyone could test positive for practically anything with a PCR test. They talked about it, that it was never supposed to be used, Carrie Mullis, before he suicided himself. It was never supposed to be used as a diagnostic. In other words, you can use it as a way of getting to a diagnosis, but you're never supposed to use it as a diagnosis. And he talks about this. You can find almost anything in anybody. It doesn't tell you that you are sick. And that's the inventor, the creator of the PCR. And even the CDC said it wasn't useful. And they said they will stop using it in like 6 months, right? And they still continue to use it for 6 months. But now we have I call it the testing industrial complex, this whole industry of just tests, people making tests. You got to get them at an airport. You got to get them when you go to a different country. You got to get them before you check into a hotel. You got to get them if you want to get a new job, if you refuse to do this.
Why are people still afraid of COVID? It's Omicron. Right. It's not. I mean, even before the death rate was way lower than they said. And I have videotape of Bill Gates saying that we didn't know that the death rate was low from COVID, but now we do. And so it just seems like but it doesn't matter. They still want you to be afraid like it is the original strain of COVID, right, Ryan?
Yeah, but even that, according to the Initis group, and the standing biggest peer-reviewed study on the topic found that pre-vaccination, it was 0.3 for under 59 and 0.7 for under 69. Within 94% of the world population falls in that category. That's the flu is 0.1, 0.2. So we're talking dramatically less than the flu pre-vaccination. So yes, Omicron and forward, it's even less according to their own statements. See, I'm with you. There's no reason that I don't think anybody should have feared this, especially not now.
I thought it was over when I showed the video on this show of Bill Gates saying that it has a very low fatality rate and that it only mostly affects the elderly, kind of like the flu, but a bit different. I thought that was going to be over and nobody was going to be afraid anymore. But it's like nobody has seen that video, and no matter how many times I show it to people, they'll just memory hole it like it never happened. And we still got to be, people tell me, oh, you got to worry about kids and long COVID and kids and long COVID.
Neither of which actually are valid, by the way, because all the data around kids, even the Newsweek pointed out, I think 2021, 2022, that I think it was like 40% of the number they were citing, which at the time was only 500, was kids that were already in the hospital and given a test just like this, and they had a broken leg or something, right? But then long COVID, as far as I can tell, scientifically, is not even accurate. It's either vaccine side effects or psychosomatic responses. That's 3 peer-reviewed studies that find that. You know, like you're saying, the trust the science crowd weirdly never likes to look at the science. Staggering.
It is.
The other part I want to talk about too, as well, is the way they reclassified, information. I call it data manipulation. One of the ways they did that is the way they reclassified a COVID a death, right? Overall, how they made it easier to classify somebody as a COVID death as opposed to like a heart attack or had insulin problems. They changed all that mechanism around. Therefore, they can thrust this narrative management on the people and say, oh, look what's going on. People are dying. But also to the fact that you weren't considered fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after your second shot. I don't know if it's now 2 weeks after your third booster, but that's another thing they did, because a lot of people were getting COVID in between their first and second shot, but they were being classified as unvaccinated. So therefore the mainstream media can come out and saying, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Your thoughts?
Yeah, man, that is one of the most important parts of this entire illusion. And I'd like to actually come on the PCR test after that if we could, because that's also important. But, excuse me, the idea of the 14 to 21 days after the last dose, which is how that tends to go, because it was 1 first, then it was 2, then it was the booster. Now we're back to like after this next shot. That's kind of where they are. They're not making you get the earlier ones, they're claiming. But the important part here is that there has already been examples that have been proven. Alberta put out documentation that proved this. There's plenty of examples showing that the majority of all cases, deaths, and hospitalizations happen within the first 14 to 21 days after the shot. And that's provable anywhere. So as soon as you open that up, you can dump most of what happens after the injection into a category that's at least pre-shots or unvaccinated, however they frame that. And you're right, most of the cases it becomes just unvaccinated. And that was that big scam when Walensky kind of got caught, when they were using old data, and she kind of came out and had to admit that. But this is still happening right now. And this, by the way, this happened during flu before it as well. Flu and pneumonia, and the way they make the same, it's an old game they play, but people are just catching on during COVID, I think.
Also, too, as well, is that, I don't know, I've been living out in California for quite some time. Every flu season, I see the hospitals open up like tents, and they put it right outside. So it's like they've always got this uptick around flu season.
The people forget, and we've covered this on this show, of course, and people who I've debated about this have no idea about this. And in 2018, 2019 flu season was one of the roughest flu seasons ever. And from coast to coast in the United States, hospitals were setting up triage tents in their parking lots because of the flu season. And people memory hold that. You can look it up. Go back and look up that flu season. And I'm not making that up when I say coast to coast. They were having these flu triage setups in there. That's right out of the newspaper articles that I read. That's how I know about it. It was in corporate news because nobody was that afraid of it before COVID, right? And so they would tell you the truth about the flu before, and now you don't get it.
If you look at the flu view map on CDC, you're right, Jimmy. The whole country's red. Like it was a crazy year.
Yeah.
And I look at it one of two ways. Either that shows you because you can find, I think, 8 or 9 countries that have now admitted they have samples that say they saw COVID before it was found in Wuhan. However you want to take that information, they could be lying or however, but it either means that it was circulating elsewhere, or I think flu just became COVID-19. They just call it that. I mean, one of two ways is how I look at that. But
yeah,
you're right.
Well, that's certainly not what happened. Flu got afraid of COVID, like we all did, and it decided it didn't want to go. It didn't want to come out. They want to stay home. The flu was at home, lockdown, getting everything delivered and wiping it down, just like we were.
Yeah, flu wore a mask, so it worked.
Yeah, the flu was wearing a mask.
Ryan, did you want to say anything else about the PCR test before I get on to the next part? Because we are right now living in the whole kind of like epicenter of the origins of COVID that are coming out with Congress having reports, whatnot. And there's something to discuss there too as well, because I think you always have a great nuanced point of view. A lot of people, well, do you have anything to say you want to say about PCR before we went on to talk about China?
If you want to, I'm happy to. If you want to point, this is important because the important part about the PCR test is we have to remember that on January 11th, 2020 is when China sent this genetic sequence that even Moderna has now admitted they've still to this day never had something physical in their hands. All of this is based on this original sequence, right? So the idea that the PCR test could somehow be testing for whether we even, they've admitted they didn't even isolate it when they sent that sequence. The CDC in China also said that. So whether it's even testing for what we're actually dealing with is the first question. But then you can get into, like you said, how it's actually used. And both Mullis, who has now passed away, as well as people that have used it for testing with sea animals, have found that it is wildly inaccurate, right? But on top of that, as you said, it doesn't tell you if you're sick or not, right? If you can go as far down as you want and you'll eventually find something, because as he said himself, you'll basically find anything if you keep amplifying enough, but it does not say if you're sick. And I don't even think this discusses asymptomatic. I think this is just about people that have particles passing through their body that you can identify, and that gets deemed positive. But then it goes all the way up to 40 cycle threshold, which is what they're using, which guarantees false positives. All of the data shows that. And I think they're doing this on purpose. I really do. I think a lot of these points, including masks and bacterial pneumonia, call me a conspiracy theorist. I think these things are being used to increase the actual illness that we're seeing. I think you can prove that, but that's my opinion.
So what does the FDA and the CDC say about the PCR tests? Do you know?
Well, of course, that they're completely, they argue, one, that they're accurate, that there's only a risk of false negatives, of course, because it only works one way, right? But also that there are ways to test all of the variants and so on, which I can prove that's not even accurate.
Well, I would tend to believe the FDA and the CDC on that. I'm going to bet that the PCR tests are accurate.
They approved OxyContin, and I had a great time on that.
Yeah, so they're right. They were right about Vioxx and OxyContin, and I bet they're right about the PCR tests. So I'm going to have to push back on you there, Ryan. I bet the FDA and the CDC is correct on this.
Yeah, they're clearly batting 1,000 with all the drugs that haven't been recalled over the years.
Yeah, all right. So, everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah. No need for them to get fired or even the person change positions.
Yeah.
It should be the same person that handled all that.
That's right. That person who handled that should probably be now the new head of the FDA.
That's how they do it. When you screw up, you get a promotion. That's how
they were the same woman. Cotton lady still work.
Yeah.
As soon as he leaves Purdue Pharma, then he'll take up the FDA.
Exactly.
Deep Pharma, they call it.
Gottlieb going from FDA to Pfizer and whatnot, and say, hey, you should trust these companies like Johnson & Johnson, who gave a bunch of Africans mesothelioma with their drug testing and really didn't have to pay anybody off. I mean, these are trustworthy big pharma companies that we have to pay attention to.
Come see us live on tour. We're going to be in Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, Tampa, Boca Raton, Orlando, Dallas, Houston, San Diego, Bloomington, Illinois. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.
Last but not least is this clip from Johnny Vedmore. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Independent Review. Hope to see you all next week.
Day after day, alone on a tank, the man with a foolish grin is having a perfect wank. Yes, look, it's news pasty, and we're in Ukraine again. The Times Radio. Times Radio has got a lot of pictures for a radio show. I don't trust that it's just radio. I think they're doing more than just radio, but I bet you if you listen to their words, they probably do it so that you don't have to say what's going on the screen, and they can use it for radio, that's for sure. But they definitely got images here, and we're here again to looking to this wonderful pasty-like news. What do we have here? Well, we have a story. It's going to feed you a narrative. It's from a video entitled "Russian Troops Could Surrender on Massive Defensive Lines Are Breached." Ha! Oh, Russian troops could surrender en masse. This is the if defensive line, because Russia's just any moment now the kosh is going to fall and Russia will fall to the mighty Ukraine. I mean, historically, everybody knows Ukraine is a bigger country than Russia. It's better armed. What do you mean? There's a pasty in my ear, and it's saying something to me. He's saying, "You're a wanker." Oh, that's not very nice.
There is this quite surreal photo on the Times website and also, on social media, the lone Ukrainian flag among the rubble of this decimated village. It makes you wonder how significant this advance is, how much we can actually celebrate.
This is amazing. So the video is titled "Russian Troops Can Surrender on Massive Defensive Lines Are Breached." It starts off with, "Look, the Ukrainian flag lying in the rubble of disaster as we all clench our butts and realize the dream is over."
What little is left of the land won.
Yeah, that flag was actually put there several days ago. They still had to clean up some buildings because apparently there were some Russian troops still left there, and it's slow going. It's a big celebration because Robotyne, the town that they just officially declared liberated, is pretty much at one of the lines of what's known as the Surovikin line, named after the Russian general. It's a series of trenches and dragon's teeth and anti-tank obstacles that the Ukrainians have finally penetrated through, and it seems there's a breach, but it's
right. They can't even get a guy with a working microphone and a good internet connection on there to talk about it. He's probably nothing. The guy, I wonder who the guy who is actually speaking on the video is. Anthony, I think she called him. But it's just like not very interesting comment. Oh, they have to get past all these things and get into these lines, and this is warfare. But what are you telling us? You're telling us that the other side is going to lose. Yeah, it sounds like Ukraine's in real crap at the moment, isn't it? Having a hard time.
Going to be slow going. Let's not have any illusions. It's going to be slow going. The Ukrainians don't have any kind of air superiority, so they have to go meter by meter, trench by trench, emptying the trench. There's booby traps. There's soldiers still there, and they have to protect their flanks as well. So it's a significant breakthrough, but it's going to be slow going.
And is this an indication? I mean, you described there the sort of painstaking centimetre by centimetre counteroffensive. Is there a sense that this is how the counteroffensive is going to go on?
Well, it will. You have to take that as a given. It's going to be slow. That said, at some point, the Russians don't have enough reserves to plug the holes.
What? Are they really saying this? Are they really trying to act like the Russians don't have enough troops? Russia, historically, should we think about their troops? They don't have enough reserves. Well, they wouldn't be able to call up any more reserves. That's it. They'd be doomed. If it was a case where they couldn't call up reserves, they don't have enough reserves. That's what that's the line he's trying to feed you. He just said Russia doesn't have any reserves, yeah? What was the actual line?
The Russians don't have enough reserves to plug the holes. And
they
there's
don't
a
have enough
strong
reserves to plug
that
the
at some
holes.
point, a part of the front line, which is vast. I mean, it's more than 600 kilometers long, and even up to 1,000 if you count the northeastern part.
You're talking 600 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers long, and at any time the Russians won't have enough. What about the Ukrainians who have a significantly smaller army? Are they going to have trouble plugging those holes? Oh, yeah, maybe Russia will have to bring some from the east. But, then China could attack. Oh, no, unlikely China's going to attack. What's going to happen? Alaska's going to attack? Don't think so. The Americans don't actually fight wars for themselves. They fight wars in other people's countries at the cost of other people. So it's not going there, is it? Where is it going?
Ukraine. At some point, if there's a breach, you might see Russian troops.
Wait a minute.
If there's a breach, you might see
wait. Look at this guy. Is this guy wearing outside underpants? Do you see that? Look at this guy. No wonder he's got a mask on. Who would want to be seen in this? Has he got outside padding round his crotch? Oh, bulletproof penis.
At some point, if there's a breach, you might
don't want to be shot in
see
the ass.
Russian troops surrendering en masse.
Oh, yeah. So this is the spin. Okay, this is the spin. This is what they gotta do. This is what they gotta do. These are the pasties. They're throwing out all of the pasties onto the floor. They're like, look at our mainstream news pasties. This is a terrible situation. It's terrible for Russia. Russia doesn't have enough reservists. They have a really long front line. And at any time, Russian troops might surrender en masse if at a part, just a little bit of that 600 kilometer to 1,000 kilometer line is breached. They'll surrender in mass and they'll hand over Putin. They'll hand over Putin for sure this time. They'll hand over Putin. What's this? What? We're living in an imagination land. We're living in an imaginary land where we wear outside combat diapers. Oh no. The reason why that guy was having to wear combat diapers, combat diapers, was because he's shitting himself so completely heavily at the moment because he knows the opposite is true. So what these guys are telling you is actually true on the other side, that the Ukrainian forces know that at any time one of that part of that 600 to 1,000 kilometer front line could be broken, and in that case Ukrainian soldiers will surrender en masse. And what you're seeing here in this downward stage of the Ukrainian war, in the end of the Ukrainian war, in the last periods of the Ukrainian war where Russia is winning, is the West projecting out what is going to happen to their ally, to the Ukrainians, and saying this is going to happen to the Russians. This is just literally they're reading out Ukraine's future. Bits of the army will have to surrender en masse if the defensive lines are breached. Make no mistake about it. They have explosive shit because of that.
At some point, if there's a breach, you might see Russian troops surrendering en masse.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You might see it. Oh, all of these Russians. No. Oh, you Ukrainians. You came in with your 10 men and we got like 1,000 men, and you're like, oh, when we're taking you over, we're like, all right. Notoriously, Russians are notoriously given to surrender, aren't they? Historically, everybody knows the Russians just give up. I mean, Napoleon knew that, didn't he? Napoleon knew that before he went to Russia, didn't he? He already knew. He already knew the Russians will give up. Hitler already knew that, didn't he? He was like, yes, send in the forces. Russia, notoriously famous for giving up their land and surrendering. That's what Russia do. They surrender en masse. Yeah, that was what I mean, that's just history, isn't it? That's history as written by Times Radio.
And then it would be a quick run. Now that the first defensive line has been breached.
Oh, wait, I didn't hear that. Then it would be a quick run. What does that mean? A quick run? What, they would be able to like blitzkrieg into Russia? They're saying that the parts of the line will fall, they'll surrender en masse, and then it'll be let's hear this. Let's hear this again. This is incredible.
If there's a breach, you might see Russian troops surrendering en masse.
You might see
and then it would be a quick run. Now,
then it would be a quick run. What, a quick run on all of the lines? What, everything? Suddenly, all of the Russian defenses would fall, and suddenly it would be like Putin would be like, "Oh, we cannot do this. Look, there's been surrendering en masse, and it's now a quick run." What does that mean? I don't know. Let's ask Usain Bolt. What's a quick run? Oh, it's under 10 seconds, that's for sure. That's what a quick run is. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm just making this stuff up, and I say stuff that sounds good, but I don't really know what's happening. So Russian troops can surrender en masse, and then it's a quick run because
the first defensive line has been breached. The second and third defensive lines protecting cities aren't as densely packed with mines.
What? And that so once they breach a tiny bit in the lines won't close up around them and leave the people who have breached the lines in no man's land or no man's territory, slowly going through mine deactivation and clearing. No. They're going to quick run in, and now everything's down. They'll just sort out these cities, and Ukraine's won. Well done, Ukraine. But what about the I know we've taken about 5 kilometers here, boss. Of the front line here. The defensive line's broken. We take up 5 kilometers, but didn't they say there was up to 1,000 kilometers? What about the other 995? What's that behind us? Is that the bear? It's Putin on a bear. Putin's on a bear, everybody. Rah!
And also the Ukrainians have adjusted. They figured out a way to detect minefields with thermal drones.
They've discovered how to detect minefields with their minds. They're actually minefields now. They're like, I can tell where the mines are. You can walk out. Oh my God, he just died. Oh well, it was obviously I had a quick problem with my mind, but now I'm back on to the mind control.
By detecting the heat at night, they've got the cluster munitions sent by the United States, which are very helpful.
And of course, hey, Russia doesn't have any of this. They don't have any of this, do they? They're listing out the positive. Oh, they're armed. They've got things to cover their weapons. They got camouflage. They got camouflage knickers. They got underwear and bra that's bulletproof, so they can't get shot in the nipples or the knobs. You don't want to be shot in your nipples or your knobs when you're doing this sort of stuff. I can tell you that.
In clearing trenches, and they're also, chipping away at the rear, the logistics ammo depot.
Are they? And that's not happening. Russia's not doing that at all. How far do you think Ukrainians are getting in? I mean, a drone in Moscow or something. What about something deeper? Anything deeper? Not a holy hell, hope in hell chance. Ukraine would be smashed if they went anywhere near proper Russian territory. They're fighting in their own country. They're fighting. This is all in their own country. Oh, their defensive lines are breached. Oh, and now I've taken back 5 kilometers of my own country, and now I'm being decimated again. Oh, Ukraine.
What's your sense of where
accent.
Russian morale is? Because it must be pretty low. They must be wondering.
Oh, what? They're trying to beat it. Oh, those Russians. Oh, those Russians. Oh, they must be low. They must be sad. They must be all crying. Papa Bear Man, righty. Putin, dude, he's not doing as well. We Russians, we really sad. The Russians, I think, are probably quite fine.
What the hell they're doing there, and particularly, after last week's, the demise of Prigozhin and so on.
The demise of a person who the West put up as an idea. Oh, look, it's the red of Russia. Russia's going to fall. Look, he's marching on Moscow. Prigozhin. Oh, he's dead. He's dead. I said this in another news basket, didn't I? When I was saying, Prigozhin didn't work out. Oh, no, it didn't turn out to be nothing. He went to meet some people in a city, a couple of politicians, and they hid from him because they didn't want to get involved. And he's probably going to be dead in a month. Guess what? He's dead. Yeah, he got killed. Why? Because he's a fucking idiot. You think that Putin is going to let that stand? Oh, you stupid people. You stupid people with surely the Russian people are like, we thought Putin was going to be gone by now. And everybody in Russia is nearly almost all are standing, looking at the West and looking at the horror show that's happening in Western countries and saying, Putin, please stop these guys from coming anywhere near us.
I mean, is there a sense that the Russians may be losing their appetite for the battle as much as the Ukrainians
is there a sense? Is there a sense?
To
Can you sense it at all?
Or at least have gained the edge in this latest battle?
Please tell me, you sensate man of all knowledge who knows nothing and doesn't seem to talk anything sensible. Please tell us. Tell us the Russians are unhappy. Tell us they're sad. Tell us that they're all listening to Tchaikovsky with melancholy. Please tell us, please.
Well, I think that could be said of most of the Russian rank and file. They're contract soldiers. Many of them were they're not contract soldiers, rather, they were conscripted.
No, this guy is saying that could be said. Isn't that true for the Ukrainian ranks too? Isn't that what it is? Isn't this what we're talking about? Isn't that warfare? Oh, but they're paid. Yeah, they paid to go to it. And what do they feel? They feel love for the country. Yes, they feel love for the country. Do they think they're going to go home anytime soon? No, they probably get a good turnaround because they got loads of troops.
So they don't particularly want to be there. Then again, you have professional paratroopers that are well-trained soldiers. You don't have Wagner anymore, but they're defending now. So it's easier to defend than attack.
Look at those underwear.
Sent into...
Look at the mobile poop pants. Oh, it's almost like Elon Musk's mum's been selling those Alestra chips around again, but in Ukraine. Oh, we didn't have much to send you in the way of aid, so we sent you these wow chips cooked in Alestra fat. Yes, they'll make you shit out of your anus, but shut up, pleb.
A meat grinder, the way they were in Bakhmut. So they're more or less content to stay in a trench. And that's better for morale. When you're being constantly sent into a meat grinder in one direction.
It's better for morale is that they're constantly in a trench, which they've been constantly in a trench for ages, and majority of them, 1,000 kilometers of them, are going to be in trenches.
And then your own troops are threatening to shoot you if you decide to retreat. That doesn't do much for morale. But I would suspect that at some point, if there's not much ammunition and there's not much water and food, as some of the prisoners taken by the Ukrainian army have admitted to the Ukrainian forces, then you might see the lines start to fall apart.
Again, they're fantasizing. They're desperately fantasizing about anything that could go bad for Russia. Anything, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Otherwise, it's going to be a slow, meter by meter reacquisition of territory.
This guy just loves saying meat grinder, meat. I think he's the same as me. He fancies grabbing some grub anytime soon. And why not when you're a greedy journalist? Oh my God. What a bunch of lies these guys tell, eh? It's all rhetoric. It's all rhetoric.
Woof woof.